Oh, hey, everybody. Good morning, and welcome to the sermon portion of this morning's Ashland Christian Church service. I am obviously not here again. We are on vacation this time, and I don't know where we're at. Stephanie planned this trip. Stephanie planned this whole thing, and quite frankly, even if I hadn't planned it, I probably would have forgotten by now. So regardless, I am not here, but I am here with you in spirit. And I have obviously recorded this well in advance so that way we can all share this time together and we all can make sure that we stay on track with the sermon series. And to that end, we need to play a game this morning. It's not really a game. A game is strong, but we need to have an activity for all of us, okay? So here's what we need to do. I need everybody in this room to close your eyes and use your imagination. I know. It is a Sunday morning. You may be very tired from last night. I don't know what your Saturday nights usually look like, but you could be very tired. I know it won't be long. I'm going to keep talking. It's going to be good. You're not going to fall asleep, but you are going to close your eyes, and I'm going to close my eyes with you is what I'm going to do right now. I'm closing my eyes. I'm going to imagine with you. If you guys see me peeking right now, you shouldn't be because your eyes should be closed. So you can't see me peeking. How dare you close your eyes? Anyway, here we go. I want you to imagine that you are a citizen of this city called Sebastia. Sebastia in 35 AD. Now, Sebastia in 35 AD is a bit of an interesting city. It gives you options. In this game, it's sort of like Monopoly. You've got certain pieces you can play. You could be the thimble. You could be the car. You could be the noose if we weren't playing Monopoly anymore and we were starting to play the game Clue. Either way, you're going to be your own piece. And instead of being a piece, you get to choose what nationality or ethnicity you are. You have three options in Sebastia in 35 AD. Number one, you could be a Roman because, well, it's a Roman city. Like most cities at the time, most places in the world, Sebastia is a Roman city. So you could be a Roman, and whatever it is you imagine with Romans, that could be you. Second of all, you could be Jewish because, as it turns out, it's a Roman city that was gifted to the Romans by a Jewish king. Now, all of this is kind of funny. The king is Herod the Great. Herod the Great was installed by Rome, so he's like Jewish in name only, but you get it. Rich people give each other gifts. Governments give each other gifts. It's kind of what they do. And Herod the Great decided that he was going to take the city of Sebastia, and he was going to build a couple of different temples, one to the emperor himself, one to a Roman god, and he would build these temples, and he would kind of renovate the whole place, and then he gave the city over to Rome as a gift. So there's lots and lots of Jews in Sebastia in 35 AD, so you could be one of those. Or, if you prefer, you could be a Samaritan. The Samaritans are there because, as it turns out, Sebastia is in Samaria. It was a Samaritan city. Actually, it was kind of like everybody's city over a period of a couple thousand years. Kind of everybody that came in and went to war, they conquered the place, they took over the place. It was what it was. But it was originally a Samaritan city, and it was in Samaria, and so that's just kind of where it was. So there's a lot of Samaritans. So you could be Roman, you could be Jewish, you could be a Samaritan. It is up to you as you imagine yourself as a citizen of Sebastia, a Samaritan city, which is actually Roman, which is actually sort of Jewish. Imagine that's who you are, and that you are alive in 35 AD. Here's the important part. It doesn't matter who you are exactly. It's, again, like Monopoly, it's just a piece. But what's really important is that you are a believer in Jesus of Nazareth. You became a believer in Jesus of Nazareth during his ministry. He came through. This is kind of what he does. He came rolling through, and he preached, and he taught people, and he talked about the kingdom of God, and he had this sermon that had all these crazy illustrations in them, and he did miracles. You know, he healed the sick, and he cast out demons, did all sorts of stuff. And look, it's this is another time in the whole exercise when you get to imagine kind of what it was that made you decide you were going to follow Jesus. Maybe it was his preaching that you absolutely loved. Maybe there was this, demon-possessed person that was there all the time, and he cast the demon out and, saved the person. Or, maybe there was a leper or somebody who was paralyzed or somebody, who had this, a disease forever, or, had a cleft palate or some sort of other deformity that made them isolated from the community. Whatever it is, here's what you need to imagine, is that you, in 35 AD, live in Sebastia, and you are a believer in Jesus. He came, he preached, he performed miracles, and then he left. And you didn't follow him. Because sure, there's a lot of people that follow Jesus, right? He's got the 12 apostles. You probably would have, either seen them or met them potentially. He also, he has, there's a time where Jesus sends out like 72, so that means he had 72 to send out. Jesus was unique amongst Jewish rabbis of the time. He had women who followed him who were just as important and were equal in his ministry. But look, most people didn't follow Jesus. When Jesus feeds the 5,000, for example, you don't have 5,000 new disciples. When Jesus goes to a place, he goes to the temple, he teaches in the temple. It's not like everybody left the temple that day, packed up a bag, and followed Jesus to the next town. The vast majority of people who knew Jesus, who met Jesus, who heard Jesus, who witnessed Jesus, most people, and this includes you in this picture as you have your eyes closed and you are imagining that you are alive in 35 AD in Sebastia, you did not leave to follow Jesus. So I want you to imagine that you then, a couple years after the fact, you hear about Jesus, and a couple years later, you get word that, hey, Jesus was killed. And then, hey, his disciples said he raised from the dead. And you said, well, that all makes sense because I heard him preach and I saw the miracles. There must be something. He must be the Messiah. He must be God in the flesh. He must be whatever it is you have in your head. In 35 AD, now you believe in Jesus, dead, buried, and raised. You believe in Jesus the way that you knew Jesus. Open your eyes and answer this question. If that was you, how would you make sure that you were living your life correctly? By the way, wouldn't it have been fun if I was standing here when I said open your eyes? Like you all have your eyes closed, and then I just sneak in a side door or something. I climb out of the baptistry, something. Just a whole, it was a whole trick the whole time. I said I was going on vacation, but I just wanted to do this. I think that'd have been funny. Not funny enough to do it, actually, but I thought it'd be funny. But anyway, now that I've lightened the mood slightly so you could have thought about my question, let me ask the question again. If it's a 35 AD and you live in Sebastia and you are not an apostle, you're not following Jesus, how do you know that you are on the straight and narrow? How do you know that you're doing the things you should be doing? I think this is a really, really important question for us to ask. It's a really important question for us to understand, historically, with everything, because I think in our minds we filter everything through the book of Acts, and in the book of Acts most things are filtered through Jerusalem, and we forget that Sebastia, that's a real city in a real place with real people who really would have believed in Jesus. How did they make it? Right? It's a struggle in Jerusalem where they still have some apostles, at least the ones that didn't scatter and leave to preach the Great Commission somewhere else. But how did they make it? How would you make it? And please understand, right? Please get this. As we've been talking about the Sermon on the Mount for the last few weeks, we've not yet gotten to one of the more difficult passages, one of the more convicting passages, and we're going to read it right now. This passage has everything. This is like the elephant in the room to early century Christians. The elephant in the room, not even just to early, but to everybody, but specifically for Christians who had very few options on what to do and how to be. This passage is actually somewhat scary. This is what we read. This is what we read in Matthew chapter 7 in the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus says this. He says, "Enter by the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction. And those who enter by it are many. But the gate is narrow and the way is hard that leads to life. And those who find it are few." Now, here's the thing. If you believed in Jesus, you probably heard him say that. The Sermon on the Mount is one of those things we understand. We know he repeats it a couple of different places. We assume this is kind of standard operating procedure. Everywhere Jesus goes, he says that. So he says, stuff from the Sermon on the Mount. So let's assume that you believe in Jesus. You are this person in 35 AD. It's been a few years after Jesus has been dead. He's been raised from the dead. It's a few years after you met Jesus. It's all of that stuff. And you want to do the right thing, but here's what you know. Jesus said the way to living correctly, to living out the gospel, to living out the kingdom of God, to doing what he wants, that is a narrow path. It is a path that not very many people find. It's hard to find. It's tough to follow. So most people follow a much wider path. a path that he says leads to destruction, but on the way to destruction, it is way simpler, it is way easier, it's way less difficult to find, and you just kind of get to do whatever. Jesus claims an exclusive path that if you follow him leads to life where no other path does. And the question, of course, is this. If you are alive in 35 AD and you are a citizen of Sebastia, how do you know that you are on the narrow path? Now, we got to pause the sermon real quick. We got to pause. This is, I'm even going to take a drink. This is a full-on pause, just pausing the sermon. And I just got to say, I just got to give, a disclaimer, right? This is one of those passages, you'll hear people from time to time, make some claims about Jesus and say, oh, Jesus is this or Jesus is that, and it's like criticizing Jesus. And one of the things you'll hear from time to time is, well, if Jesus is all about, love and peace and inclusion and everything else, then why does he say that he's the only way to God? Why does he say that the path following him is a narrow path that most people don't find? If Jesus is so nice and Jesus is so loving and Jesus is all of the things, why is it okay, or why is it possible, why does it not disprove all of that for Jesus to say most people are on a path to destruction because most people aren't following me? That's the thing I've heard most of my life. I'm 41 years old. I've heard that since I was in middle school. This passage kind of always comes with critique, and sometimes Christians will try to look at the passage and soften it or explain it in such a way that it's not quite as potentially offensive. And other Christians really lean into it and are like, you're darn right, Jesus is that, right? But I just want to point out as a disclaimer before we talk too much about this passage that Jesus is unique in so many ways. I mean, Jesus is God in the flesh. Jesus saves humanity by dying on a cross. Jesus, is the only one who can do, these miracles that people have been waiting on. I mean, the lepers and demons and things like that. Jesus is so unique. He has women disciples. We just said that, right? Jesus is so unique. But in this case, he just isn't unique at all, I mean, here's the deal. It's not like Jesus is the only one who says that he's the only way to follow. It's not like he's the only one who says, I'm the one that you need to listen to exclusively. Look, everything in Judaism is an exclusive claim. The Jewish people believe they are the chosen people of God. They're not a chosen people of God. They're not one of many chosen people of God. No, they understand that they and they alone, as descendants of Abraham, are the chosen people of the promise of God. It is absolutely exclusive. And by the way, I actually think it's interesting. This is one of my favorite random facts that we could talk about with this. But if you look at the story of Adam and Eve, the story of Adam and Eve is fascinating because in the Garden of Eden, God says, hey, man, look, you guys can do anything you want except this one thing. That's it. You can do a billion options, but there's one thing that you can't do. And you know what they did? The one thing. So they did the one thing, and then they get kicked out of paradise, and now suddenly it's exactly flipped. It was once that only one way was to sin, and everything else was fine. And then after that, there's only one way to know God, the chosen people, right? Abraham, all that. And all the other options are bad. It's kind of funny that their entire theological story revolves around the loss of options when you think about it. And so the people of Israel who have lost in their theological story all of the options that they had, they are an exclusive, they have exclusive claims that we are the only chosen people of God. Of course, the Samaritans, as we've talked about, are the same way. The Samaritans also make the same sorts of claims because they believe that they are actually the chosen people of God. So, that's two groups that are exactly the same way. But in Jesus' day, it's not just the religious folks who are like that. Rome doesn't show up and say, we've got this divine emperor, but that's okay if you've got your own divine emperor. Go ahead and worship him and not ours. It's never happened. The Romans at best would let you follow your religion, but also you must follow theirs, at best. And that's even when they were that nice, right? The Romans showed up and it wasn't like they're all the other empires are just as good as us. Pay taxes to them too. No, the whole point of everything that is ancient Rome is that they are the exclusive people. They're the only people you're supposed to be part of. It's not just then, though. Like, we talk about religions in our world. We could talk about Islam. Probably shouldn't. You get somewhat to a sticky situation every now and then. But just know that the people of the Islamic people in this world, particularly those who live in Islamic countries, they're not exactly the most tolerant people. They kind of want you to do things their way, really, and they'll politely encourage that, or not so politely encourage that, but they're never ever sitting around saying, oh yeah, everything's cool, everything's equal. There's many paths to one enlightenment. And now that I've said enlightenment, let's talk about the Buddhists, right? The Buddhists are like, oh man, we have this whole other religion. Like, their whole thing is they're different. Like, they have a whole different idea of religion than most of us. But their whole thing is that there was this guy who became enlightened, and now if you want to be enlightened, you do what that guy did. You don't make it up. Like, you don't have other. There's not another guy. You do what that guy did, right? Even, I'm sorry, I know I'm sort of beating a dead horse here. Even kind of atheisty, agnostic-y, science-y people today. I don't know any other way of putting it. People that would not want to be part of this sermon. Even those people are sort of like that. I don't know if you've seen the signs in people's yards every now and then, and it's like, in this house we blah 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 blah, and it's like, we believe in science. And that always cracks me up, because it seems like what they're claiming is that we believe in science above and beyond other stuff. Or we believe in all science. We don't reject science, right? Because it seems to be an attack on the guy 2 doors down. That's why you put something in your yard, because you want to attack the guy a couple of doors down. And so well, that guy doesn't believe what I believe about science. And so we believe science and you don't. And I just want to point out that what's funny is, I bet the people with the signs in their yard, I bet those people don't believe in a flat earth. There's science behind a flat earth. It's terrible science, of course, but it's there, it exists, it's science, right? What people actually mean when they say, oh, I believe science, is they mean, I believe the stuff that I believe I'm right about that you don't. Everyone, okay? The craziest atheist, the most militant atheist in the world, right? He believes what he believes, and you say, what about being open-minded to spirituality? He's gonna laugh at you. It's just everybody. And I'll be fair. If you come to me and say you should believe atheism, I'm gonna laugh at you. I think atheism is the stupidest thing in the world. I am not committed to that. We all are following a path. And we all believe the path that we are on is exclusive. Okay, so that rant was a little bit longer than it probably needed to be, but let's come back to the sermon. Okay, where were we at? Oh, you would imagine that you were a citizen of Sebastia. And I had asked, how do you know if you're on the straight and narrow path? How do you know that if you are on the path that Jesus taught, or how do you know if you're on the path that is wide and goes to destruction? Okay. Let me tell you how you're not going to do this. Okay, here's what makes this challenge difficult. In 35 AD, you're not going to open up your Bible and read it to see what Jesus taught in the Gospels, or what the apostles teach in their letters, or what Luke tells about in the history of Acts, or even what John writes, about the apocalypse. You're not going to be able to do that, because it's 35 AD and there is no Bible. And I mean that quite literally. We are decades, all right? We are 10, 20 years easily from the first gospel being written. And the gospel that we quote the most usually is the Gospel of John. We are fully 50 years from that book being written. 50 years out from that. You are almost definitely not going to make it to see that. John was very old. John outlived a lot of people to be able to write that, okay? You are almost definitely not going to see the writing of the book of John or the book of Revelation, right? You're also undoubtedly, if I told you, if this was, if we could go back and say, hey, we got all these books, there's all these letters, they're written by the Apostle Paul. If you probably don't know the Apostle Paul in Sebastia, but if you do know him, you don't know him as the Apostle Paul, you know him as the Pharisee Paul, who is persecuting the church. I mean, you're a decade away from him converting. And then more time after that from him becoming an apostle who goes around the world and plants churches and does his thing and writes letters everywhere, right? Like 35 AD, this is a period of time we have to understand. We have to understand. I love the Bible. I'm not speaking ill of the Bible. I'm just trying to help us understand that the Bible is not the fourth member of the Trinity. It simply cannot be, because people lived and died as Christians and did not have access to these writings. And they were able to follow Jesus the entire time. I know it's a little bit mind-blowing. And in fact, then when you get into even once it's written, you're looking about, 300 years between you're a citizen of Sebastia and the actual New Testament canon is formulated and ironed out, and this is what we call the New Testament. That comes along like 300 years later. In that time, all these people, they managed to function as Christians just fine. But they couldn't, open their Bible, and that made it hard. It at least took a tool away that we had. And so you think, okay, well, they don't need a Bible. They've got the apostles. Right. Well, I've already alluded to this. Most of the apostles are in Jerusalem, which is far away from Sebastia. You've never been to Jerusalem. It's not like you just jump in the car. You don't have cars. Just how that works. So you can't just jump in the car. You don't have that. But even the apostles that are in Jerusalem, kind of doing Jerusalem stuff, the ones that didn't stay there, they scattered, right? Like Thomas goes to India. You want to go to India to talk to Thomas? Or like all these people, what is it? Nathaniel goes to what is it? The place that the Kardashians are from. What is that called? Oh, I'm forgetting it in the sermon right now as we are recording. I'm forgetting what that place. What is it, Stephanie? Armenia. Stephanie knows where the Kardashians are from. I need you to make fun of Stephanie for being into the Kardashians later on, because apparently she knows it. Anyway, so Nathaniel he's off in Armenia. The point is, you don't just go up to like one of 11 guys or 12 guys and be like, hey, we've got a dispute in our church. Or I've got some questions about how I follow Jesus. It's far more complicated than that. And so what you have instead is like you might go to church, which is what we do. But here's the problem. You go to church and who has any answers? Who knows these things? Like who has anything that like it's kind of like the too many cooks in the kitchen thing. Like if it's Thanksgiving and everybody wants to make the mac and cheese and everybody's got an idea about how to make the mac and cheese, well then you don't have a way of making mac and cheese. You have an argument, right? If everybody knows how long to make the turkey, how long does that turkey go in the oven? And at what temperature, and you've got 3 different ideas, then you're never going to turn that oven on, because how do you hammer out the disputes? In the church, they don't have the scriptures, they don't have the apostles, but they do have a community of people who all are probably going to say, I think I know the answer. How do you stay on the straight and narrow? How, in what sense are you able to know I am following the way Jesus wants me to follow? And I got to tell you, I don't want to make this harder because it's already tough, but I'm going to, because what Jesus says right after the straight and narrow thing, the next sentence in the Sermon on the Mount is this. Jesus says this: beware of false prophets who come disguised as harmless sheep, but are really vicious wolves. Come on. Like, this is already hard enough. This task of figuring out and knowing what you're doing is already tough. And now you have enemies? Now you've got Goombas you've got to jump over? And I reference, something stupid from a video game from 40 years ago, but look, Jesus doesn't even do that. Jesus does not depict this. Like, when I think of a wolf in sheep's clothing, I always think of Looney Tunes. I think of Wile E. Coyote, and I think of that one with the dog with the stuff in his eyes, right? And he always gets the hair in his eyes. It's the red hair, and he's a white dog. And he always has he always gets Wile E. Coyote, and it's never close. It's never like, oh my goodness, the Wile E. Coyote is gonna get the sheep. No, like the sheepdog is always out front. Jesus doesn't even describe it that way. Jesus doesn't even say, oh, there's gonna be these wolves in sheep clothing, but don't worry, you've got it. Don't worry, you're fine. Don't worry, it'll be okay. Don't worry, you'll be able to spot them. Jesus literally calls them vicious. Jesus seems to want us to be wary of and afraid of these fake prophets, teachers, priests, apostles, teachers, gurus, people who are walking around pretending to be something they're not. Jesus wants us to be afraid of these people because he doesn't want us to fall for their shenanigans. He doesn't want us to fall for their nonsense. He wants us to be able to spot their nonsense, spot their shenanigans, and say, that's nonsense and that's shenanigans. But the point is, not only is this task exceedingly difficult, but on top of the task being exceedingly difficult, we have enemies that are in our way that are here to, get us off track. And so the question, again, has to be asked. It is 35 AD. You don't have the scriptures. You don't know apostles. You live in a multicultural society with Romans, Samaritans, and Jews. You believe in Jesus. You trust in him. And your theology is absolutely as good as it could be. How do you know that you're on the straight and narrow path? Well, I think Jesus gave us the answer. And I think Jesus gave it to us if we just continue to read. The very next verse after the business about the wolves this is what Jesus says. This is how Jesus says we can identify people who are fake and people who are not on the narrow path but on the wide path. This is what Jesus says. Jesus says you can identify them by their fruit. That is, by the way they act. Can you pick grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? A good tree produces good fruit, and a bad tree produces bad fruit. A good tree cannot produce bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot produce good fruit. So, every tree that does not produce good fruit is chopped down and thrown into the fire. So, yes, just as you can identify a tree by its fruit, so you can identify people by their actions. I would love to explain to you and expound a little bit more on what that means, but I'd rather do it just by telling you a story. One day, Jesus said, there was a certain Jewish man who was traveling from the road between Jerusalem and Jericho. This was a particularly dangerous road. It had all sorts of pitfalls on it, all sorts of stuff, and people knew not to kind of travel on that road, especially like night or whatever at different times. But this specific Jewish man needed to get where he needed to get. And so he traveled on this road, and as you may have guessed, he gets attacked by bandits. They steal all of his money. They take all of his stuff. They even take his clothing, which, of course, is valuable, as we've talked about recently. But they take everything, and they leave him bloodied and broken for dead in the ditch. Well, he laid there for quite some time, hoping somebody would come by to help him. And sure enough, somebody does. It was a priest. He was on his way the other way. Instead of leaving Jerusalem, he was coming towards Jerusalem. He was a priest, and he was on his way to go to work at the temple. And he was on his way, and you would think, oh, wonderful, a priest, a holy man, a righteous person of God, a leader of God's chosen people. Surely he'll help. But he didn't. Not only did he not help, but he actually had been on the side of the road as this man, and he decided to make absolute sure he could not help him in any way, so he crossed the road to the other side, and he walked away on his business, leaving him alone. It just so happened that was not the only man on this road. Another man came by, and he was, in fact, a temple assistant. Someone else who was going to the temple, someone else who was going to work, and someone else who should be able to be trusted to care and love and represent God in this world which God has made, with God and his people. He was a leader. He was an example. He was somebody people looked up to. But he as well looked at the situation, looked at the man in the ditch, and said, nope, I don't want to help him at all. He could have. He had the means. He had the time. But instead, he walked on by. Third coming along was a Samaritan, a despised, Jesus said, Samaritan. Despised Samaritan. Someone the Jews did not like at all. And the Samaritan came along, and I don't know where he was going, somewhere though. He had a lot of money on him. He had a lot of resources on him. He was on his way on a journey. But he paused what he was doing because he saw this man who needed help. He got off of his donkey and he bandaged the man as best he could. He had some oil, he had some bandages, and he did everything he could to kind of help the man while he was there. But then he realized, I'm going to need more than just what I can do here in the ditch. He's been out a little bit. And so what he ends up doing is he takes the man and he hoists him up and he chucks him on his donkey and he takes him up to the nearest inn. He puts him up in a room for the night, paying for the room, of course, and he kind of nurses him all night, making sure that his wounds are clean and he's safe and he's warm and just trying to make sure he's as comfortable as he can. Well, like I said, this man was on a trip, like he was on his way to do something, and he can't just forever hang out with this man. So he goes to the innkeeper. He says, "Look, here's the situation. I found this man out in the ditch. I know that he is. I know it's kind of a lot of a burden. So I'll tell you what. Here is a bunch of money. If you could take care of him with this money, you keep what you need for yourself, all that stuff, whatever you need to do. But here's the money. If you could take care of him, I'm going to be back through in a few days. I'm going to check on him. If there's any expenses that go above and beyond this money that I'm giving you, I will reimburse you then." The man went on his way, and the man who had been attacked by bandits was saved. Now, in the original context of this story, the parable of the Good Samaritan, it's in response to a question about, who is my neighbor? It was a man asking essentially, who is it that I need to love? Who should I be loving? Who should I be? When you say love your neighbor, who's my neighbor? Like, it surely doesn't mean that guy. And Jesus was kind of helping him to understand, like, well, no, it is actually that guy. Like, it's actually the guy you're asking about. That's exactly the guy who it is. Whoever it is your neighbor. But I think it's also this parable, even beyond that initial conversation about the neighbor. I think this is a really good illustration of that you can tell a tree by its fruit principle. Because you would think in the story that the priest, and you would think in the story that the temple assistant would be good trees. You would think that they would be people who would be willing and able to do the right thing if given the opportunity, if given the time, if they had the means. They had all of that, and they chose not to. And look, we can talk all day. Different people have broken down this parable and talked about why they did or why they didn't. But it doesn't matter. They had an opportunity to help, and they chose not to. And here comes the Samaritan, a despised Samaritan. Same opportunity. Same time, same resources, same everything. He chooses to do it. The question is, which one is a good tree? The answer is, of course, the Samaritan. Which begs the question, which one is on the narrow path? And the answer is, of course, Samaritan. Jesus teaches us that God is love. God is love. He's light, he is life, but God is love. And when we talk about all the paths we have in life, it amazes me how many Christians and how many Christian groups, ideologies, churches, denominations, whatever, how many Christians ignore that God is love? They'll talk about God in so many ways. They'll act towards each other as if God is so many different things. But Jesus teaches us that God is love. And so if you want to get close to God, you need to get close to love. Because God is love. If you want to know where God is working in this world, God is working in, through, and around love. Because God is love. And if you want to know which path is the path that is the narrow path that leads to life versus all the other paths that are wide that lead to destruction, you need to look to the path that is loving. This is not that easy. Especially because we have sometimes some very broken definitions of love. But at the end of the day, for us as Christians, we need to understand that even though we have a Bible, even though we have the teachings of the apostles, even though we have 2,000 years of church history, even though we have an organized church and we have all of the things, all the stuff these people didn't have in Sebastia in 35 AD, even though we have all those advantages, the answer is the same for us today and us in the hypothetical we were closing our eyes with. If you want to know you're on the narrow path, the question has to be asked, does this make me more loving? Does this bring me closer to love? Is this more loving or is this less loving? Is the fruit of this tree love or is the fruit of this tree something else? Look, it's not always going to be perfect. We're going to make mistakes. Absolutely. We will sometimes think we're on the right path and we're not. That's where repentance comes in, right? We'll think that we're on the wrong path, and maybe actually the wrong path was somewhat closer than the right path. I don't know. Then that's another reason why we have to repent. But our standard, what we're looking for, is that story of the Good Samaritan. The Good Samaritan he's a Samaritan. His theology is terrible. And I got to tell you, I can't tell you if my theology is awesome or not. I can tell you I believe what I believe for the reasons I believe them, and I can defend it to the ends of the earth, but I'm also going to tell you I could be wrong. And you believe what you believe for the reasons you believe them, and you are more than capable of defending those to the ends of the earth if that's what you so choose. But you could be wrong. What is never wrong is choosing to love people. The Good Samaritan was wrong theologically, but he was on the straight and narrow path, following Christ, moving towards love, moving towards God. And so for us, it's not in any way an instruction to say, forget the Bible or forget the church or forget it. It's simply saying that we have a litmus test that we can gauge everything from. In everything we say and do, in everything that we are, in every choice we make, in every cause we support, in every ideology we decide to promote, in every theology we decide to build our lives on, we need to understand you can tell a tree by its fruit, and the right tree is always going to be a tree that is leading us towards God, and that is towards love. That's the answer. And that's how Christians, for 300 years not having a New Testament, that's how Christians for decades not having the books written at all, that's how they were able to not only be Christians, but be faithful enough to get to the place where their church they built was able to expand into the church we enjoy. They were faithful because they understood you can tell a tree by its fruit, and the narrow path is the narrow path of love. This morning, we are in what week is this? This 7th week of our series called Unsolicited Advice. We've been talking about the Sermon on the Mount. We've been talking about Jesus giving instructions that maybe we don't want to hear, but we need to hear. And this morning, as we talk about the narrow path, as we talk about the wolves dressed in sheep's clothing, as we talk about a tree, and you can tell it by its fruit, and as we talk about the Good Samaritan, which is not in the Sermon on the Mount, but it fits quite nicely, I think, we learn this lesson of unsolicited advice from Christ. There are endless paths we can walk in this world, but Christ has invited us to walk the narrow path of love. There are endless paths we can walk in this world, and Christ has invited us to walk the narrow path of love. Guys, look, I'm so grateful you're here. I'm so grateful. Whoever came to church today, whoever was here, I'm so grateful. I miss you guys so much. Like I do love traveling. I do love being on vacation, but like my favorite day of the week is Sunday. I love coming to church more than anything else in the world, and I miss you guys tremendously. And I can't wait to be back next week. So I'm grateful to you. I hope you guys have an incredible day. I hope I have given Jamie enough time to come up here so she can sing the invitation song now. And more than anything else, I hope that as we leave today, we commit ourselves to being people of love and following Christ and Christ alone. Thank you guys. I love you guys. We'll talk to you soon.